our Wednesday night class for this week. Thank you for joining us again in our study of the life of Joseph from the book of Genesis. This week we will be in Genesis chapter 49. Jim Morgan along with Aaron Tremblay here. We're hoping to be able to conclude this study in the next couple of weeks, so I just want to take a minute to mention, as always, if you have any questions, we welcome them. I invite you to share them with us via the email provided in the video, but also we're encouraging people to send us suggestions perhaps for the next study that we're going to do following the life of Joseph. So feel free to reach out to us with your ideas for that, and we will definitely take a look at them and consider them as we look at our next study.
Because if you don't, we'll just have to pick something that we're interested in, and you don't want that.
You know, that'll go. So we are in Genesis 49 this week. We dealt with the blessing of Joseph and his sons last week with Jacob. The one thing I think that's really important as we move into this chapter from last week is we need to remember Jacob's words to Joseph's sons that they would become Reuben and Simeon. Mm-hmm. So, and they received those blessings. And the reason that's important is because we need to remember Joseph receives really the blessing of the firstborn, the double blessing.
Double blessing.
So, so that's really the key to remember from last week. And now we're in 49. Remember also Jacob's ill. That's why Joseph comes to him. He's near the end of his life. Jacob has sensed that. Joseph has sensed that. And so as far as these sons are concerned, these are potentially going to be Jacob's last final words to them. And traditionally, those final words were in the form of a blessing to the children. So,
and they have no idea what he's going to say.
Nobody has.
They've got to be worried.
Yeah, and especially those ones like Reuben, who really played a big role in the demise of Joseph.
Mm-hmm.
Simeon and Levi know how much they really upset their father with the whole situation with the Shechemites, which we've talked about. So nobody really knows where this is going to go. It's a good point. So 49 and verse 1 says, Then Jacob called his sons and said, Gather yourselves together that I may tell you what shall happen to you in days to come. Assemble and listen, O sons of Jacob. Listen to Israel, your father. So he's going to begin with Reuben, the sons of Leah is who he begins with. Mm-hmm. So Reuben, you are my firstborn, my might and the first fruits of my strength, preeminent in dignity and preeminent in power, unstable as water, you shall not have preeminence. Because you went up to your father's bed, then you defiled it, he went up to my couch. So when we look at Reuben, I think there's something kind of interesting that happens here in verse 3. Jacob specifically says you have preeminence in two things, preeminence in dignity and preeminence in power, but then he says you don't have actual preeminence.
Yeah.
In terms of,
and you don't have any stability.
Correct. In terms of blessing. And notice what Jacob chooses to be his primary reason for this is Reuben sleeping with the concubine, right? And again, I'm sure Jacob doesn't forget, and Joseph hasn't forgotten Reuben's role, or any of the brothers, in the demise of Joseph either. But that's the primary reason. That's the instability part of Reuben. And so Jacob says, when I look at you, my son, there's too much instability in terms of leadership and being the preeminent one with the rest of the tribes. We need somebody that's more secure, stable, and these kind of things to be the one who plays that role.
Yeah, you suspect that Jacob looks at him and sees himself.
Yeah, that's a great point.
Because there's just a lot here that he says that, hey, you looked in the mirror lately?
Yeah, and again, remember as Jacob's giving these blessings, God is working through this too. And mm-hmm. God's going to carrying out his plan. I think the reason so much is included here in 49 is because this has so much to do with the future of Israel as a nation, mm-hmm. and the future of God's promise being fulfilled through Judah, both with David and with Jesus ultimately being fulfilled.
And this idea of, sleeping with the concubines, apparently there is something else behind this, because if you remember when Absalom revolts against David, one of the things he does, he goes up onto the roof and goes into the tent of the concubines, which is a way of saying, I am taking over. Now I am the power. And so if there's anything about that connected with Reuben, well, I'm the firstborn, so I'm going to get everything. Again, we go back to the prodigal son.
Yeah,
Okay,
taking the inheritance early.
But I'm going to get my inheritance early. I'm going to act like my father's already dead.
Good point. Yeah.
Doesn't sit too well with Jacob, especially because until he's absolutely gone, nobody else is going to be in charge. So that we look at it and we think, well, my goodness, he holds a grudge for a long time, but there might be a message here that Reuben was sending to his father that didn't go across real well.
And again, with all first three sons, there's a history of instability. It's not that they made one bad decision that they then repented of. It was a series of mistakes.
Disrespect and violence.
Yes, that would sum up the first three sons. So verse 5, we get to Simeon, and included alongside of Simeon is Levi. And the reason why Simeon and Levi are essentially addressed together is because their major, what do I want to call it? Their major sin, their major downfall in their life was something they engaged in together against Jacob's wishes, and really actually violated a commitment that Jacob had made with
or was trying to make
Shechem.
anyway.
Right, and kind of used Jacob's word that he had given them and this agreement they had negotiated, and all of a sudden they come in and take advantage of the situation. And
and the incident is with Dinah.
Correct.
When she was raped, and they go in and pretend like, hey man, it's okay, we got lots of sisters, let's just have a big party here, but if we're going to marry into you guys' family, and they introduce them to circumcision, and then when they can't move and they're sore, it says they go in and they just slaughter the whole group
and take a slave.
So it's not like they took the guy out and beat him up.
Right.
The one guy. Yeah, this is just genocide. This is just everybody has to pay for what one person has done.
And a complete loss of control on their part.
Unstable.
And that's what you're going to see here as Jacob speaks of them. He says, Simeon and Levi are brothers, weapons of violence are their swords. Let my soul come not into their counsel. O my glory, be not joined to their company. For in their anger they killed men, and their willfulness they hamstrung oxen. Cursed be their anger, for it is fierce, and their wrath, for it is cruel. I will divide them in Jacob, and scatter them in Israel. So the violence was, with the Shechemites specifically, the violence was a byproduct of their anger. We're familiar with the verse that says, in your anger do not sin.
Yeah.
Well,
we would say they have anger issues.
They had some anger issues, and they let their anger get the better part of their judgment. And they not only, again, it would have been one thing to carry out the violence against the one person who had really committed the atrocity with their sister, but they took it out on all of them.
Everybody.
And so we notice the specific thing that Jacob talks about in the end, that both of them will ultimately be scattered among the tribes of Israel. And as we were talking about earlier, we learn in Joshua that that's actually what happens.
Yeah, Simeon it says he takes his territory from Judah, because Judah's got so much, and Simeon gets that, so he's absorbed by Judah, basically. And then, of course, Levi, 48 cities of refuge, they become the priests. They don't even get an inheritance. They're literally scattered among all of the tribes.
Into every tribe.
Every
Part
tribe.
of them is into every tribe.
And they don't have a specific place. They kind of wander, sort of a roving priesthood system.
So what Jacob speaks of them is what ultimately does come to pass. And although Levi does end up assuming a leadership role among all of Israel in terms of its relationship to God and leading in a spiritual capacity.
Well, Moses is going to be Moses and Aaron.
But that's ultimately more so determined by what happens with the golden calf than anything else when they stand with Moses.
Yeah.
And it kind of sets them apart in that way. So important things that he has to say of Simeon and Levi, and we see them come to pass. And then really the most important section I think we have in this chapter is going to be the one that we find here in verse 8 and following, that deals with Judah and his blessing, because this is going to tie into David's kingship. This is going to tie into being messianic prophecy in terms of Jesus' coming.
If I could, there's one
Yeah.
more. There's one more place
Sure, go
here.
ahead.
You know, this is just Jacob, but back up there where it says they have killed men in their anger and hamstrung oxen. It's like, okay, you killed them. Why'd you have to hamstring the oxen?
Yeah, that's
You know,
just-
we could have had a whole bunch of new animals.
Now
here.
you're just wasting money. You know?
Yeah, and that's basically it. What it
Yeah.
finally comes down to is, you know, we could have kept the oxen. You know, okay, you killed them, but why'd you have to hamstring the oxen?
That's a great point.
So now on to Judah.
So with Judah, and let's just recognize what's happened here. We've gone from the firstborn being Reuben, to then the secondborn being Simeon, to then the thirdborn being Levi, and now we arrive at the fourthborn,
Fourthborn.
still with the sons of Leah, but we've moved down the line in terms of leadership. Somebody has to be the one that Jacob passes his role as patriarch or father or leader of all the. In other words, once Jacob's dead and then a fight breaks out among all the tribes or they have
Who's
a
gonna
disagreement,
settle it?
who's going to settle it? I mean,
Yeah.
who's going to be the one to lead this thing?
And each of them's probably sitting there thinking, he's going to give it to me.
Right. And normally that's easily settled by the fact that whoever's firstborn, being the oldest and being the wisest and all those things that are actually true of the middle children as a middle child, you know.
That's a common misconception.
But we would naturally, it would be resolved by going to Reuben. So this is important that all of Jacob's sons are gathered around. And he says, no, Reuben, you will not be the one. No, Simeon, no, Levi, you will not be the one. And now he gets to Judah. And let's remember, when we talk about transformation in the story of Joseph, probably the biggest transformation that we see in the story of the life of Joseph is in Judah, more so than anybody else. Does Joseph get transformed in what he goes through? Yes, but he wasn't.
But at core, he's still the same person.
That's right.
Judah's core has changed.
Oh, it changed drastically. So just remember that as we move into verse 8, we have all the sons gathered around. There's an anticipation not only of blessing, but who's going to be the leader of us? Who's going to be the one to fill that role? And as Jim has mentioned several times, Reuben, as Jacob begins to speak and says his name, assumes he will receive that role, and he does not. And Simeon and Levi the same. So here we get to Judah. Judah, your brothers shall praise you. Your hand shall be on the neck of your enemies, and your father's sons shall bow down before you. Judah is a lion's cub from the prey, my son, you have gone up. He stooped down, he crouched as a lion, and as a lioness, who dares to rouse him? I don't want to go too quickly through all of this. I want to give some opportunity to kind of address some of the things he mentions here. One thing specifically, since we've been covering the life of Joseph, that should stand out to us in verse 8 is that he says, your father's son shall bow down before you. Now, Joseph had a dream, and that dream said that Joseph's the one that gets bowed down to, which he did. But now we're not just talking about a present reality. We are talking about, I think this is the beginning of
Prophecy.
the messianic idea. Yeah, the prophecy behind all this. And not only, by the way, will Jacob's sons bow down to the tribe of Judah, but all men will bow down to the tribe of Judah. Every knee shall bow and every tongue shall confess. Kind of deals with that idea. So notice again, they'll praise you. Your hand shall be on the neck of your enemies. In other words, your enemies will be subservient to you. They'll be
bowed down before you.
correct. And your father's sons will also bow down. So really important where we start off here with Judah. Now remember how the brothers received Joseph's dream. All the brothers are there. When they found out we're going to bow down to who? And that's what set off all
In
that
your
stuff.
dreams, kid.
And now the same thing is being said of Judah, but let's remember again, the transformation that occurs with Judah. Judah stands up to Joseph before they know it's Joseph and puts himself in a position to be sacrificed on the altar for his brother Benjamin. Judah's the one who takes that leadership role. So I think the brothers' view of Judah has changed, even though I think he held some respect from them in the beginning too, because when he says, let's just sell him, they go on board with that. He essentially leads them then. So I think even though this is a similar prophecy to Joseph, I don't think it's received by the brothers the same way it was received.
Well,
when
I
it was spoken with
think,
Joseph.
like you were talking about, he's going to get the leadership role.
Mhm.
And so, yeah, they'll bow down to him because he is the leader. When Joseph comes in to Jacob, he bows down before his father. Why?
Mhm.
Because that's the head, that's the patriarch.
Mhm.
And so if Judah's going to inherit that, then yeah, his brothers will bow down. It's a symbol. We accept your leadership. So yeah,
And
what I think is interesting is there in verse 9, you're a lion's cub, like a lion, like a lioness. If you would not mess with the whole lion family, you do not want to mess with Judah. And in the book of Revelation, the lion is Jesus,
That's right.
tribe of Judah,
The Lion
the
of
lion of Judah.
Mhm.
And so again, the prophecy from the very beginning, this tribe is going to be associated with the lion, and then the lion and the lamb. The sacrifice, which you've already mentioned, Judah was willing to sacrifice himself, and now he's a lion.
Mhm.
Well, you go to Revelation, and Jesus is the same way. He's willing to sacrifice himself, but when it comes right down to it, he's going to be the lion of Judah.
And I think a great connection there is in the second line of verse 9, where it says, "From the prey, my son, you have gone up."
Mm-hmm.
From lamb to lion, right? And Judah, from being among those who were his sons and all the evil that they were involved in, now becomes the leader. How does the NIV word that?
It says, "You return from the prey, my son."
You return from the prey. He stooped down and crouched as a lion.
Like a lion, he crouches and lies down, like a lioness who dares to rouse him.
Yeah, so Judah, don't mess with Judah. That's what he's saying.
And again, it's kind of interesting, but I think there's a little dig here, because you remember when they brought Joseph's coat back to him?
Mhm.
Some wild animal has torn him apart.
True. The scepter shall not depart from Judah, nor the ruler's staff from between his feet, until tribute comes to him, and to him shall be the obedience of the peoples. So now we're getting into, or we're continuing with this idea of prophecy, and we're talking about more than just a leading of his father's brothers. The scepter has to do with ruling, right? Shall not depart from Judah. They won't cease to hold that role, nor the ruler's staff from between his feet, and tribute will come to him.
Yeah.
And remember, even in Judah, when the kingdoms are divided, Israel falls first. Judah holds for much longer than Israel does, but they ultimately end up in exile. But they return and are reestablished. And ultimately, again, this is fulfilled in Jesus Christ. The scepter, the ruling, is perpetuated in Christ indefinitely. Anything that sticks out to you there in that verse?
Well, just, the scepter will not depart from Judah. We know that's prophecy because it's quoted.
That's right.
There's no question about this. And it goes through David, which there's a partial fulfillment there.
Mm-hmm.
But God specifically says, and this is not a conditional promise, there will always be a descendant of David on the throne.
On the throne. Mm-hmm.
Well, there was this whole period where there was no descendant of David on the throne. Yeah, there was. Because we're not talking about physical, we're talking about spiritual.
Mm-hmm.
Jesus is on the throne.
That's
So
right.
there will never be a time when a descendant of Judah is not going to be on the throne.
That's right. His eyes are darker than wine, and his teeth are what? Oh, I'm sorry, I skipped verse 11. I wasn't doing that on purpose.
We don't like verse 11. So.
Yeah. Binding his foal to the vine, and his donkey's colt to the choice vine, he has washed his garments in wine, and his vesture in the blood of grapes. His eyes are darker than wine, and his teeth are whiter than milk. So Jacob here is going into some descriptive language regarding the tribe of Judah and connecting him very much. You notice that wine, grapes, vine, all those things coming up. And remember that those things have to do with prosperity.
Yeah.
Talking about wine, the vine, the grapes, all of those things are tied into prosperity. And so I think that's kind of what he's primarily dealing with there, is the prosperity and longevity maybe even of Judah.
Yeah. And I think there's also a lot more than that, because tether his donkey to a vine, colt to the choicest branch. Well, when Jesus enters Jerusalem,
Mm-hmm.
this has got a lot to do with it. But then washing his garments in wine, his robes in the blood of grapes. You can't help but hear an echo of what's going to happen in the New Testament with Jesus there.
Mm-hmm.
When we have the Lord's Supper, this is the fruit of the vine, represents the blood of grapes. So I think that, all through here, this is not Israel talking. This is God prophesying about what he's going to do through this boy.
Absolutely, and through future generations. So then we move to Zebulun. He shall dwell at the shore of the sea, and he shall become a haven for ships, and his border shall be at Sidon. And that does become true in terms of where Zebulun's allocation is for his land ultimately when that allocation is given by Joshua. Issachar is a strong donkey, crouching between the sheepfolds. He saw that a resting place was good, and that the land was pleasant. So he bowed his shoulder to bear, and became a servant at forced labor. So Issachar is kind of an interesting.
What was that all about?
Yeah. I'm not sure what Issachar did, but
yeah, somewhere along the line he has ticked off somebody. But I like the NIV that Issachar is a raw-boned donkey lying down between two saddlebags.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think this has to do with, if I was going to try and summarize what Issachar is going to be, he's going to be a hard worker, he's going to live off the land, essentially, is what he's saying with respect to Issachar.
But somewhere along the line, and submit to forced labor, Egypt, Babylon, or Assyria, Rome.
Got a hard road.
Yeah, this is not all going to be, blue skies and rainbows.
No.
This is going to be a completely different story. Not everything is going to turn out well for any of this group.
Now, Dan is interesting because we've already talked about before when we were dealing with those who move into the land. Dan is interesting because Dan only has one son.
Yeah.
Right? So, when we look at what's going to happen with Dan, remember he's kind of a small, what do I want to say, small fish in a big pond or something
like that.
But Dan shall judge his people as one of the tribes of Israel. Dan shall be a serpent in the way, a viper by the path that bites the horse's heels, so that his rider falls backward. I will wait for your salvation, O Lord. Now, Dan, remember, a lot of times in the Old Testament, the boundaries of God's people is given as from Dan to Beersheba. So he's one of these borders of the land of God's people. I think that's part of the reason why it talks about this idea of biting at the heels, the rider falling backward. He's a viper on the path. I mean,
well, that's where the gold calf was.
Right. Correct.
In the territory of Dan, and it just says, they go up to Dan, they go to Dan to worship. Dan has the gold calf. So yeah, it's going to be a viper that's going to bite Israel.
Oh,
and man. All the way through, that was Jeroboam. And all the way through, it talks about this king did not do away with the sin of Jeroboam. You get to 1 Kings 17, 1 Kings or 2 Kings? 2 Kings 17, where it's talking about, this is why God sent him. The sin of Jeroboam, the golden calf. Yeah, it really could be described as a viper that bit them and they fell backwards.
Right, and the other one they put in Bethel, of all places, which we've already talked about, the positive significance of Bethel. But it becomes, and all of that has to do with Jeroboam not wanting people to go down to Judah to worship, because he's worried, well, if they go down to Judah to worship, they'll associate Judah with being the place of control.
We'll all get back together again.
Yeah.
So I won't have a kingdom.
Yeah, so he puts one on the way to Jerusalem. He says, just stop here and worship the calf. And he puts one in Dan as well. So it's a good point. And man, does that hurt Israel for a long, long time. So you want to pick up with 19 with Gad?
Okay. Gad will be attacked by a band of raiders, but he will attack them at their heels. Again, kind of a counterpuncher. Gad's going to be there. When people attack him, better watch out, because he'll come right back at you. So verse 20 is really odd. Asher's food will be rich, and he will provide delicacies fit for a king. So apparently this is, he's going to be the baker in the family, the pastries or pastry chef or whatever. Yeah. But his food will be rich, and what that means is prosperity, what you were talking about a little while ago. He will provide delicacies fit for a king. Okay, so we're going to have prosperity here. And in 21, Naphtali is a doe set free that bears beautiful fawns. I wonder how Naphtali felt about that one.
Well, Naphtali is in Upper Galilee, right?
So, yeah, the hill country.
So maybe that's part of the reason why it's referred to in this way,
Yeah, and they kind of got a reputation as being, they're out there roaming the hills, like deer.
Frolicking to and fro.
Yeah, something like that, Bambi. But just means they're going to be kind of the free spirits. They're not going to settle down. They'll probably just, roam. And that's exactly what happens to them.
Mm-hmm.
But now in verse 22, we get to the longest one. Joseph is a fruitful vine near a spring whose branches climb over a wall. With bitterness, archers attacked him. They shot at him with hostility. You suppose he was looking at anybody when he said this?
Yeah. Maybe looking around the room.
Looking around the room, and all of them are going, yes. But his bow remained steady. His strong arm stayed limber because of the hand of the mighty one of Jacob, because of the shepherd, the rock of Israel, because of your father's God who helps you, because of the Almighty who blesses you. Now, let me see if I can change pages here.
One thing I was going to mention was just about Jacob. Again, here I think is alluding to Joseph's fruitfulness, and he's assuming Joseph is going to have all these
extra kids.
Many more children.
Yeah.
Which is not actually the case. So I think that's worth mentioning, because as we get further down into 49, he's going to talk about Joseph kind of adopting some of his grandchildren as his own. But
yeah, and also his bow remained steady, his strong arm stayed limber. Remember, Reuben's gotten kicked out because he's turbulent, unstable, unsteady.
Mm-hmm.
So, now we've got a comparison going on. This is why Joseph is being given the double blessing of the firstborn instead of Reuben, is because in spite of everything that happened, Joseph, and then because of the hand of the mighty one, because of the shepherd, the rock of Israel, your father's God, because of the Almighty, he just keeps going back, because Joseph depended on God.
Yeah, and Simeon and Levi were emotionally unstable versus Joseph's steadiness as well.
And they killed men in anger, but Joseph, his bow remained steady. He knew it wasn't just spraying out arrows everywhere.
Otherwise, he would have killed all his brothers.
Yeah, nobody would be around to hear this. And he goes on, with blessings of the heavens above, blessings of the deep that lies below, blessings of the breast and womb. Your father's blessings are greater than the blessings of the ancient mountains, than the bounty of the age-old hills. Let all of these rest on the head of Joseph, on the brow of the prince among his brothers. So, I don't know about you, I get the feeling he kind of liked Joseph.
Yeah, a little bit.
Yeah. But, he's giving him all of the blessings. But in verse 26, again, it's just Jacob. Your father's blessings are so wonderful. They're better than the mountains. Right up until the very end, Jacob just believed the world was better because he was in it.
Yeah, and I would imagine, that Joseph's brothers know that he already talked to Joseph and blessed Joseph and Joseph's kids, but that's not going to stop Jacob from giving him some more blessing.
No.
Right here.
No.
And by the way, making it the longest blessing that's included in this chapter.
Yeah, especially after the two really short ones that he just got through with.
Yeah. And I think, like you mentioned, he gets 25. This isn't Joseph's blessing. This isn't just his father talking about him. Oh, this is by the God of your father will help you. The Almighty is going to be the one to bless you. Your blessings will come from heaven. He's talking about, Asher's food and this and that. Oh, but Joseph, your blessings will be from heaven, and it's all of those kind of components to it.
Yeah.
So.
And if this is a prophecy, which I believe this is inspired, maybe not the part about I'm better than mountains, but you got 400 years coming that are going to be rough, and you're not going to have anything else. You're going to be slaves. Well, anybody else in the room ever been slaves? Yeah, Joseph. But he hung on to God. He stayed with him. And one of the things that is surprising when you get down 400 and something years later, it says that everyone who had come up out of Egypt, the males had been circumcised. They had maintained their relationship with God. Now, at some points, they'd forgotten even what it meant.
Sure.
But at the same time, and so I think that's what's going on here. If y'all will just remember Joseph's faith, then that'll get you through as well.
Well, and that's what, again, looking at Joseph as a foreshadowing of Christ, that's kind of what we do with Jesus too, right?
Yeah.
We look back at Jesus and his suffering that he went through and all of those things. And so for the joy set before him, we look back at him and how he lived his life for God in spite of all those things. And now we're called to that same faith. The example we're called to follow is Jesus's. It doesn't say compare yourself to everyone else at your church. And if you're doing better than they are, you're okay. It says, no, this is the standard, is Christ. And I think it's the same. Your point is a good one. It's the same with Joseph. Remember Joseph. Joseph was faithful as a slave. Joseph continued to trust God, and God delivered, and Joseph was blessed as a result of it. Now you're the ones in slavery. Remember Joseph. Remember how Joseph dealt with that. Remember how he humbly lived. Remember how he relied on God, whether he's in prison or a slave or, all of these different things. And I think it echoes kind of the same call we have to remember Christ. Remember Jesus.
And that's the reason why these stories had to be told.
Yes.
You've got to pass these stories along.
Mm-hmm.
And today we need to be passing these stories along
Absolutely.
to our kids.
Absolutely.
Because this is where you get your faith. It reminds me of what Paul says, you be followers of Jesus, or you be followers of me. He says, why? Because I'm a follower of Jesus.
That's right.
It's not, you be a follower of me because I'm so wonderful. It's because I follow Jesus and he's the example that you need.
And it comes from places like Deuteronomy 6 and also in Joshua when they set up the stones. And they said, okay, well, why are we setting up these stones? So that when future generations come back here and they ask you, what's that pile of stones about? You tell them what God did here.
Yeah.
And that's the same idea with, well, why are we remembering Joseph? Well, you need to remember what God did. Why are we remembering Jesus? You need to remember what Jesus did and pointing at those things.
It's like on Passover, where even today, my father was a wandering Aramean. And, we went down into Egypt. You tell stories because that's what's important. And, you go over to Joshua, okay? It says, as long as there was anybody alive who knew Joshua, people of Israel kept being faithful. There's something about these stories that just really, really inspire you.
I think the last thing I'll mention, and we can kind of move forward in the chapter, but in 26 when he talks about better than the blessings of my parents, mightier, even better than what Isaac and Rebekah had, I find that kind of interesting. Joseph, you get to surpass everybody, everything, I think you might have just liked Joseph a little bit more.
Yeah, I get the feeling. And then he said, oh yeah, Benjamin. Because, Benjamin had been for years the favored child. And now Benjamin is a ravenous wolf. In the morning he devours the prey, in the evening he divides the plunder. So the same problem that was with the others, violence.
Yeah. And Benjamin, the tribe of Benjamin, does become known as for their prowess in battle.
Yeah.
As warriors. Remember, Saul is from the tribe of Benjamin, and he's considered a mighty warrior. I mean, he's taller than anyone else in Israel.
So Benjamin could have been the tribe the king came from.
Absolutely.
Because, when God sends Samuel back, he says, if you had just not messed up, God would have established your kingdom over Israel forever. Jesus could have been from the tribe of Benjamin.
Yeah.
He was born in Bethlehem. But the interesting thing about that is Benjamin, if you look over at the end of Joshua, where you got the second coming of Sodom and Gomorrah, it says these men are Benjamites. Where, the same thing that was going on in Sodom and Gomorrah, the people are in there, the men of the city come to him and say, bring them out. We want to have sex with them. That's the tribe of Benjamin. So Benjamin is not going to turn out well, but then again, he's going to be some of the greatest fighters ever.
Wouldn't you say too that the two lines, it says Benjamin's a ravenous wolf, but these two lines basically are a summary of how Benjamin loses the throne?
Yeah.
Because he kills a bunch of people in the morning, right? But at night, he keeps the stuff that he was supposed to destroy and divvies it out.
Yeah,
right?
you think of that story of Saul.
So that's pretty much the summation of how Saul lost, like you just pointed out. When Samuel comes back, he's like, what's that? What does he say? The bowing of...
Yeah, what's the lowing of the cattle that
I hear in my ears. And
that's the cattle that the people wanted to kill.
That's right. So I think that's kind of interesting that kind of summarizes that situation. Saul goes in, he kills, he establishes his ability to fight and their prowess as warriors, but then at night he's dividing the spoil. He cannot let that stuff go to waste. Who does that sound like?
Yeah.
Jacob. Going back.
Yep, as a matter of fact it is. And, we talked last week about if you had asked Jacob, hey, which one of these is going to be the great one? He would have either said, well, it's either going to be Joseph or Benjamin. And Benjamin's the first king. And completely messes it up. Well, then it's going to be Joseph. No, it's Judah. So again, it's not what you think, it's what God's going to do.
That's right.
So he says, all these are the 12 tribes of Israel, and this is what their father said to them when he blessed them, giving each the blessing appropriate to him.
I don't know if the brothers would agree with that.
I'm not sure, especially, about the food.
Yeah.
I'm not sure about that one at all. So, well, let's see. Actually, chapter 50 begins here at 49:29.
Mm-hmm.
So, why don't we just pick up next week?
Sure.
We'll just cut it off here, and we'll go into the death of Jacob. We'll find out what's going on, and then we get to the bones of Joseph. And at that point, maybe next week we might even be through.
Yeah, we may finish next week, and we will. We have some ideas for ourselves of where we'll go next if there's
you
no
know how
more
that
suggestions brought in. So again, just let us encourage you. If you have an idea or something you'd like for us to study over the course of several weeks, let us know, and we'll definitely talk about it and see which direction we decide to go. But we will continue studying after this is over. It'll just be on a different topic, but provided to you in the same way.
Yeah. And let me just say, I really appreciate all of the encouragement that we've been given through the last week. Seems like every time that we talk to somebody, man, I am really enjoying the class. For those of you who aren't, that's okay too. But we really do appreciate the encouragement.
Yes.
Thank you for that.
God bless you, and we'll see you next week, or talk to you next week.
Talk to you next week. Stay healthy.